Hi guys, welcome to today's panel. Thank you so much for being here. I think we're gonna go ahead and get started now. So welcome everyone. Good evening or good morning, depending on wherever you're joining us from. Today's panel is so exciting because we are going to be featuring many wonderful careers at the intersection of art and science. So the event is called Designing Tomorrow, Exploring Creative Careers in Science and Art. And we're so excited to have three lovely panelists with us today. To introduce myself, my name is Eileen. I'm a freshman at Columbia and I'm studying neuroscience. I'm one of the co-founders and co-presidents of STEM to the Sky.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annie. I'm a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm the other co-founder of STEM to the Sky. We're incredibly excited to have you all here today, and thank you for joining us.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle and I'm one of the members of the marketing and outreach team here at STEM to the Sky. I'm a high school junior in Maryland. I will be co-hosting alongside Annie today. Again, thank you all for coming. As a quick warm-up, please type your name, grade, and where you're from in the chat.
Also, a special thank you to all of our amazing panelists, Yana, Rachel, and Craig, who will be sharing their insights and experiences with us today.
Okay, for today's event, we hope to showcase a variety of unique careers at the intersection of STEM and art, otherwise known as STEAM, and perhaps inspire you to explore and pursue a career in this fascinating field yourself. Our three panelists today will be sharing their respective careers, experiences, and advice. And of course, there are many other fields to explore, but we're very excited and grateful to have Yana Zorina, Dr. Rachel Adler, and Craig Foster here to speak with you today. Here is an overview of today's event. First, we'll have Eileen briefly introduce STEM to the Sky. Then our three panelists will introduce themselves and they will give a general overview of their background and careers.
After that, we'll transition into the main part of the event, a Q&A discussion. Using the topics and questions all of you have provided us from the event RSVP form, the panelists will offer some insights into how they have found a way to combine their passions for both science and art. And then after that, we'll open up the floor to any live questions you may have for the panelists. Finally, to wrap up the event, we'll share our panelists' contact information in case you want to reach out with further questions, and we will also discuss how you can get involved with STEM to the Sky. And now I'll be handing it over to Eileen, who will explain a little bit more about STEM to the Sky.
Awesome, thanks Annie. So yeah, STEM to the Sky is a student-led 501c3 nonprofit. It was founded in 2020, back in the COVID days, by Annie and me. And our mission is really to empower middle and high school students all around the world, no matter their background, to pursue their STEM aspirations. And we really strive to showcase not only the diversity of different careers in STEM, but also the people behind these careers. So some of the ways we do this are through conducting and featuring interviews with various STEM professionals as well as students that can be found on our website, as well as hosting speaker events like this one. Yeah, we also have some initiatives on our social media as well, like Sunday Spotlights on our Instagram, where we feature fun breakthroughs in science every Sunday. So little things like that. Definitely make sure you're following us on all of our platforms, and we can definitely talk more about how to get involved with STEM to the Sky later on. But also here are some stats about our reach. And here's a team picture.
Okay, finally passing it on to our panel today, we are so excited to introduce our three panelists. Without further ado, please welcome medical illustrator and animator Craig, who will start us off.
Thank you. You can see I'm a medical illustrator and animator. I've worked on a variety of projects starting way back at the Arizona Heart Institute some time ago, and ended up working in Manhattan for a big project called Time Life Medical that was sponsored by C. Everett Koop and United Time and Life Together. And then I went on to have my own company for a number of years, and currently I teach medical illustration at RIT. You can jump to the next slide. I thought I'd share some of my work because that's often one of the things that people are curious about. So I actually have a fine arts degree from the University of Michigan, and these are just some examples of work from my portfolio at that time. You can go to the next slide. And then these are examples from the graduate program, which was the Medical College of Georgia. when I was going to school, and it's now Augusta University, but it's one of the currently 4 graduate programs in medical illustration that exist in North America. There's one in Toronto and 4 in the United States. Next slide. And then these are some samples of my professional work, ranging from things that are diagrammatic and sort of simple in the illustrative style, but represent complex scientific ideas. And then you've got some things that are, in this case, showing a mechanism of how proteins work within the cell. And then some of the complex illustrations that I do are actually 3D models that are used in animations. And I think that's it. Oh, actually, next slide. That's right. I threw in the, I actually enjoy music too as well. And that's something that I found helps me in animation, especially to understand timing. I do like to get out and ride motorcycles when I can. And the other hobby I have is home brewing, which is another interesting combination of art and science. So I've combined art and science in my life in many ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Now we'd like to welcome Associate Professor Dr. Rachel Adler.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Rachel Adler. I'm an associate professor in the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So first, I'm going to start with my fun facts. I have an identical twin sister who looks very, very close to me. Well, we're identical, but if you saw her, you would think she's me. But the fun fact about it is she's also in the STEM field. She's in artificial intelligence. And my other fact about myself is that I'm a mom. I have 3 kids, from the ages of 8 to 13. And they keep me happy and on my toes and very busy. And lastly, what I'm going to focus on now is my job. And I'm a researcher. I co-direct the Information Experience and Accessibility Lab, and I conduct research in human-computer interaction, accessibility, and computing education. You can go to the next slide. So some of the projects, I design apps for and with people with disabilities. And in the 2 that you can see here on the left is a prototype that my students and I did for a project for cancer survivors with disabilities, to empower cancer survivors. And in the one on the right, it's one we're working on right now. It's a prototype for an app for people with disabilities to interact with a navigator, a mentor who can guide them through the process and help them with goal setting, action planning. And both of these we do the prototyping, and we have a company that does the implementation of the app. We can go to the next slide. And another project that I'm working on is designing accessibility games. We do the implementation, they're web-based. My students have been coding these. We use them in the classrooms. We've been using them in university classrooms to teach about accessible design. And we've actually been working on moving them to K-12 space as well. And basically the way the games work, they focus on teaching about how to make accessible design, but through games. So you're making like that, like there's a pop ball, like pop the red ball, pop the green ball, and you're popping colors. But then like in the colorblind game, we get into a simulation mode where then the colors change, and it's like depicting as if the person was colorblind. Now there's no colors anymore, so it's hard to play it. And then we introduce, so to that point, you're introducing the challenges of software if it's not designed accessibly. And then we start introducing solutions. Well, how can we design this so that it could be enjoyable and used by everyone? So it's also practical solutions, and we've been adding to the suite of games. And so that's something that we just have been doing and spreading and keep expanding on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Now we'll pass it off to Yana Zorina, neuroscientist and artist.
Hi, thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. As a little bit of background, I studied neurobiology and neuroscience since college through graduate school, received my PhD in neuroscience at Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York, and have focused on neuroscience, pharmacology, and very basic cell signaling pathways throughout my career. I left academia relatively early to join a biotech company that was focused on neurological diseases and drug development. And since then, I've switched a little bit in that I now mostly focus on technologies and techniques rather than the actual questions themselves. So one of the things that I've been doing for the past 7 years or so is high throughput screening and high content screening, which is based on fluorescence microscopy that you can see on the right. The upper left image is actually not from phenotypic screening. It's an image from my graduate school thesis, which I love. It's a couple of neurons that grow out their processes to connect with each other. And the rest of the images show different cells, different types of cells, different processes, and what you can look at using multicolor fluorescence microscopy, where you can quantify many, many features to see how the cell signaling is going on, what functions they're carrying out, and this way you can screen for, so rather than asking a specific scientific question and looking for, let's say, a drug candidate that addresses a specific process, you can take hundreds to thousands of molecules and basically throw them all against the wall and see what sticks, where using multiple samples, you treat cells with different compounds and look either for a specific phenotype that you can quantify. So for example, in the lower left, what is the intensity of the yellow signal? How is it translocating in the cells? Versus in the bottom right, how many bright red cells are there? How does that correspond to the green signal? So you can quantify specific parameters, or you can approach it agnostically and say, here is my negative control, here is what my positive control looks like. And you ask specialized software, what is different between them? And then you can ask the software to say, okay, if this is my negative and this is my positive control, which of my drug candidate compounds actually mimics one of them? And the software will actually tell you which ones mimic it and for what reasons, what features are similar. So now I work at DSM Firmenich, which is a flavor and fragrance company where we study very basic biology of the sense of smell and how having only 400 or so olfactory receptors that detect different chemicals, how we're able to distinguish essentially millions of molecules that we encounter in our lives, and how you can delineate which receptors respond to what categories of smells. So for example, if something is citrusy or floral, and how that can inform product development in either consumer products or fine fragrances. And as a side initiative, I also happen to be the chapter chair of the New York Metro chapter of Women in Bio, which is a fantastic organization that allows women at all stages of their career to progress in the field of life sciences. And this ranges from the classroom to the boardroom, actually starting out with high school. Next, please. Now, I am a scientist by day and an artist by night, and art is basically my creative outlet where I can turn off my brain a little bit and just get into a sense of flow. And I got into this, so I've always loved creating art projects as far as I can remember myself during childhood. And when I got into graduate school, postdoctoral training, that kind of fell by the wayside. I got married, had 2 kids, and basically had no more time for art. And then in 2016, I decided to put my foot down and say that this is a part of who I am, and I need to bring it back into my life. And when I started thinking about what I should actually portray and what type of artistic techniques I should use, I decided to return to my passion for beadwork and create art that is actually inspired by fluorescence microscopy that I use every day. I've been working with Mount Sinai Friedman Brain Institute, where I participated in a few exhibits called Art of the Brain. And a few years ago, actually, smack in the middle of COVID, I worked with Baycrest Foundation in Canada, and that's the image on the right, where all the artists were given these large models of the brain, and we could design them in whichever way we wanted them. And I've also participated in discussions of art as therapy. So I believe this is my last slide.
Thank you, Yana. And I believe we have featured you in a few of our previous panels, so it's great to have you back again to share your insights.
Thank you.
Now that you've briefly heard from each of our panelists, we will open up the floor now to the part you've all been waiting for, the panel discussion and Q&A.
Before we open it up to live questions, we wanted to go through the most frequently asked questions from the RSVP form. And panelists, feel free to piggyback off of each other's answers. So for the first question, what challenges have you encountered in your STEAM career and how have you overcome them?
Should I go first?
Go ahead, Rachel.
So I will say challenges that I've overcome, and I guess is common for especially women in STEM, is imposter syndrome. And I would say it's still a challenge that's ongoing. It's not like I found the magic answer. And it's more, when you're imposter syndrome, for those who aren't familiar, it's where you feel like you don't belong because you see people who don't necessarily look like you in the field. And so you might be like taking classes with a bunch of boys and you're a girl, or something where you're a minority student and you don't see yourself there. So it's something that I have to remind myself, I'm here, I'm okay, I've done it, I've proven myself, but I still struggle with it. We're feeling like, am I really supposed to be here? Am I really in the right place? So I would say it's an ongoing challenge, but just reminding yourself that yes, we're here, and finding role models that are like you as well.
Yes, and I think that also applies when you try to find your place in different fields. So for example, for me, science and art kind of run in parallel as much as I would have liked for them to overlap. But it's one thing to have formal training, for example, a degree in science, and over time, it definitely takes years to overcome imposter syndrome and feel like you actually have something to say. But having a side initiative, there you feel completely kind of out of place and trying to figure out how to carve out that space for yourself.
And I'll add on to that one of the challenges I feel like I've always faced is just keeping up, not only with the rapid advancement of science, and that's one of the things I enjoy is I'm constantly illustrating something new, but because my job is about communicating science, I have to keep up on what's going on in the science world. And now that I work primarily with computer software, I also have to keep up with software as well. And when I throw teaching on top of that, then that means I have to keep up with the latest software to teach my students. So that's definitely challenging for me. And I think the imposter syndrome even plays into my role as a faculty member, where I sometimes feel like I'm teaching software that I just learned last week in order to be able to make sure we're introducing students to the latest and greatest technology. So.
Thank you guys for getting vulnerable and speaking about your experience like facing imposter syndrome. For our next question, what is your creative process like and what inspires you during the process?
Maybe I'll take this one, Rachel. A lot of my process really, once I have a prompt or have a project that I'm working on, I am in constant communication with my clients, sending sketches that are very I'd say realistic and accurate, even if they may be schematic initially, and just trying to make sure that I'm working with the researchers or in some cases the agency people to be able to fully understand the story I'm trying to communicate and then do so visually so that it's accurate. That's really where things start, and then I just continue to work back and forth with the clients until we've got a finished illustration or animation.
For me, it's similar but different because I work a lot with my students, and but definitely collaborative really is key for me, because this way we share ideas, we brainstorm, we do a lot with Figma, a prototyping tool, but before we even get there, we use like a Miro board, kind of like a poster board, but on the computer. It's a really good tool for just sketching out ideas. And so working in a collaborative process together with my students really helps me because I'm one person with one ideas, but if we're a lot of people and I have a lab and we can all share ideas, and that really sparks other ideas and gets us all chatting. And so collaborating is really key for me.
Accuracy is huge for me. I'm glad that you mentioned it, Craig. It's something that I constantly battle with, especially as I watch other people and their creative work in the field of sci art, and how it's a fine balance how much you want to stick to accurately recreating scientific images, yet having enough room for play and creativity, and how to balance those. So in most of those cases, it's my scientific brain that takes over. And one of the things that I wanted to mention about fluorescence microscopy is that it's the type that I use is not just based on fluorescence signal, but it's so-called confocal microscopy, where the way the microscope is set up is such that you can focus on super, super thin optical section such that you get an accurate signal of exactly what's going on there, as opposed to getting a general picture that might be blurry, for example. So in choosing my medium, I actually wanted to take those super accurate images and kind of turn them on their head by recreating them in 3D. And this is definitely informed by knowledge of the brain and cells and how they might look in 3D, even though I've never seen them as such, right? But that's where I wanted to kind of stand out and actually jump out at the viewer.
Really interesting hearing about how you guys use accuracy and also, Yana, your specific method to combat this sort of balance. It's really interesting. And so for our next question, how did you navigate a career path to combine STEM and the arts?
Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I can go first then. So I would say I started in a computer science background, and along the way, when I went for my PhD, I got very interested in human computer interaction and design. And since then, designing for and with people with disabilities. And so I would say along the way, things change. So I might have started as purely computer science, but then I've always been interested in humans and people and users, and that expanded to design. And so that's kind of just progressed like that for me.
I've already mentioned that it was partially inspired by my scientific work and the fact that pretty much ever since beginning my work in graduate school, I've used fluorescence microscopy and I've been using it all along. But the funny thing is, and maybe this also speaks to the imposter syndrome, I always felt like the images that I take myself are not interesting enough. They're not exciting enough. To me, maybe it would look different for a person without experience in biology, but in a lot of cases, they seem a little boring to me, which is why I always look online. There are plenty of publications with gorgeous images, and as long as I know what they're showing, as long as I know what they mean and how they relate to neuroscience, I like to recreate those. So for example, the image behind me is based on an image of a mouse retina, where the blue branches are blood vessels The red lines are neuronal axons, and the green cells are glia that support the neurons. So this is actually based on a specific image, and I tried following it to the T, such that it still makes sense to me as a scientist.
I'm going to show my age a little bit when I talk about how I found out about medical illustration, but I was actually in the library in high school and I was looking on microfilm. It was way before Google. So fortunately, information on medical illustration is much more accessible now, and I think anybody interested in that field can find a lot of good information. For me, I just knew that I enjoyed the sciences. I liked the challenge of science, but I also had a strong interest in art. And in finding medical illustration, I found a way to combine the two together and make a career helping people understand science.
And another point that I might make is that I've loved art ever since being a child, and I did kind of contemplate the idea of going into art. It didn't seem safe enough for what that might or might not be worth, right? But I just felt like that was an important part of myself that I wasn't ready to drop. And in order to have that regular source of inspiration, I decided to merge the two.
It's great to see how you come back to it for yourself, Yana. You deserve a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Another question we have is specifically for Dr. Adler. Is it is it possible to achieve universal design without sacrificing affordability?
So I think one of the issues is when you think about universal design too late. If you think about inclusive design early on in the process, then that's key. So if you're like, you know, the concept of universal design is you're really helping everyone. You're thinking, you're not just making something that will help people with disabilities, but it ends up being more inclusive for all. So if you make a ramp for a wheelchair, it can help a mom with a stroller. If you're making an application that can help someone with dyslexia, it may also help someone who English isn't their first language. So it's really thinking about it being inclusive. And the problem is when you're not inclusive initially, and then there's going to be extra cost involved because you have to go back and say, shoot, I have to redo this because not everyone can use it. But if you think about it ahead of time, constantly, like, and that's, I guess, the goal of accessible design is really starting it, spreading the word, teaching it to everybody ahead of time. So when you become software designers, engineers, you're already having the mindset of course, I'm going to make something that everyone can use. And then it's done in a much more affordable way because it's done from the beginning instead of backtracking and redoing things.
It's really interesting having like a perspective that's like open always. And for another question we have is, in a case if two STEAM researchers were competing for a grant, how would one get the funding? How would it be decided? Like, how would one get the funding?
It probably depends on the grant. So it's hard to answer this because it's hard to know which grant. But I think now with STEAM being as popular as it is, it would go over very well. And as long as you're creative and you're writing out, I mean, it's hard to know because people get rejected from grants all the time. So what is the strategy? I wish I knew the secret answer for getting a grant. But I would say, like, with adding art into STEM is new, it's novel, it's cutting edge, it's where we are, that it just adds to the proposal.
I can piggyback on that a little bit. I think that's been a challenge in the illustration field too, from a grant standpoint. A lot of times the communication medium isn't included or thought about at the application phase. So one of the things I've seen where we've had some success and progressed as illustrators is that we've been able to work with researchers, have them understand what we do and the value of including communication materials within the grant proposal. If it's in the grant proposal and the grant gets accepted, there's a budget then to be able to utilize illustrations and animations to promote and help people understand your science. So the more illustrators connect with science researchers and have a say in the grant proposal, the more likely you are to see more illustrative science moving forward.
Kind of tangential to this, it's been, over the past 10 years or so, maybe even more, there has been a very big push for science communication, right? Before that, it seemed like science was just done within the walls of the so-called ivory tower in academia, and nobody knew what's going on there, and people were practically afraid of science. There was a hilarious article published probably at least 10 years ago where somebody said, oh, the government is throwing money into science and we don't even know what they're doing, and something ridiculous is being published where a grad student, quote unquote, wasted millions of taxpayers' dollars for putting a shrimp on a treadmill. And are you familiar with that? Have you seen it? Yeah.
Yes.
And then fast forward a couple of weeks, the grad students writes, well, in fact, I built this treadmill myself for $50 out of my own pocket. And it's not just for fun, but in order to put put the shrimp in a state of at least some form of physical activity in order to study how stress regulates spread of infection. So it's not just a random activity. And this is where science needs to be communicated to the general audience, and art might be a way of making that connection where people would actually bother starting looking into the science.
It actually makes me want to create an animation of a shrimp on a treadmill. Yeah.
And I've seen it more like in the education types of grants where adding STEAM for like K through 12 education, it like really makes a difference and gets kids excited about it. So yeah.
There are books, coloring books, where people draw out cells, organelles, and basically different, whether it's a brain or heart, and it gets kids introduced very early, right? They get interested in it. It's funny, I have 2 children, and the terms they throw around during dinner, my husband, who's also a scientist, and I basically laugh later.
Thank you guys so much for your answers to the questions from the RSVP form. Now we're going to open it up to everybody else. So please feel free to raise your hand using the Zoom feature if you want to unmute and ask your question, or you can drop your questions in the chat. Right now, we do actually have a question in the chat. So, do you often see young people who also want to combine art and science in their career, but get too scared or unsure about it?
I've been involved in the push to get more K through 12 students to interested in computer science and STEM in those fields. And one way of attracting them is really through STEAM and art and science and combining the two, because once you combine the two, it's much more attractive, popular, inclusive, and interesting. So it's actually a really good strategy for getting them interested. And the other reason is going back to imposter syndrome, where then you get more of a variety of people interested instead of the same types of people interested, which really helps with that too.
I think a lot of people get into scientific art as this side project purely for yourself, where you don't think of it seriously. You think, oh, this is my side hobby that I do while I watch TV, right? Just purely for myself. And they undersell themselves and don't see how it could actually benefit other people.
And I think that's one area where medical illustration in particular, you know, really we are starting to see more value in the communication of science, as we've been talking about that, and the challenges that we face. So, you know, even things like interface design might be a way for you as a creative person to be able to express yourself and use your artistic thought processes, but, you know, still bring a scientific understanding to how people interact. I'm going to drop a quick link in the chat room too. This is the Association of Medical Illustrators webpage. And over the last few years, I've been involved as the chair of the board for that organization. But we've done a tremendous amount on that website to provide information to, especially to people looking to understand what medical illustration is and what it's about. So as a resource for you, it might be helpful to all of you to at least understand what that particular field is like.
And even looking at the university level at art departments, they're so different than they used to be, because so much has changed, and there is a big push where, you know, there might be graphic design and a lot more that just keeps expanding. So I think it is something that there's a lot of opportunity and room for and growth and things to experience in all these different fields with art.
Awesome.
RIT's, oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say RIT is really big on acronyms. So the College of Art and Design has what they call the TAD initiative, Technology, Art and Design. So within the fine arts school, they are always looking to advance projects that involve technology, art, and design. So definitely thinking from a more research and scientific orientation.
Awesome. Thank you guys for those responses. We have another question in the chat. Do you think it is difficult to find career opportunities in the art and science fields? So a little bit similar along the lines of the past few questions.
I mean, expanding on my answer before, I think there's a lot of opportunity and growth, and because the world is changing. And so I do think there's a lot of opportunities, because art isn't what it used to be alone, where people would say, you know, the starving artist, or, you know, I think because art is just expanding into a lot of other disciplines. I think there's definitely different career paths, whether it's on the computer science side with art or medical side with art. There's a lot of different ways to go.
I get asked that question quite a bit from parents of students that are in our programs, and they say, "Is my student going to be able to go out and get a job?" And I think what's really changed in the medical illustration community is that you have to have an open mind and look at all the opportunities that are out there. You get a very specific training as a student in a medical illustration program where you're studying science and art, but where you apply that and how you apply that takes many different forms. And I think Rachel's, you know, a great example of that, and understanding how Yana too has been able to, you know, take the deep understanding of very specific science and still use that to inform our art are two great examples of how you can take your creativity and move forward in very different ways.
Plus, I know that a lot of scientists who get tired of being at the bench in the lab go to become journal editors, where they need to understand the science in depth, and then they create the diagrams, the figures, the illustrations, the journal covers for these journals that are important to and basically might be beyond the level that a scientist from the lab would bother putting together. And for example, Nature journal always has diagrams that I've always noticed this. They're all done in a similar style across different papers, and you can recognize it immediately. And obviously that needs to be done with a deep understanding of the science. When I see things that are kind of artistic but inaccurate, I pretty much want to laugh.
Thank you for sharing that silly anecdote. Sorry. And our next question is, what does a day in the life look like for someone in your respective careers?
can go. I spend the day in the lab, and the funny thing is that vast majority of people that I've known that have gone through graduate school can't wait to drop the lab work and run to a desk job somewhere. I am still not ready to give up the pipette. I enjoy the hands-on work, and I think it goes hand in hand with the fact that I like hands-on artwork. And then I come home, I take care of the kids, and once they're in bed, I run to my art table because that's the true me time.
And for me, my day starts, I teach also in addition to research. So, well, depending on the day of the week. So if it's a Tuesday, Thursday, you'll find me in the morning teaching. I'm teaching an introduction to human computer interaction course. And then the rest of my time I spend doing research. I do a lot with my students, designing applications, meeting with people, doing a lot of planning, whether it's writing grants, writing papers and publications, and also researching and thinking about our next topic that we want to do or expansion of current topics. And then I get home and I also have my kids, and after they go to bed, I go back to work to continue. So it's pretty long days to, balancing out. And that's, I guess we should have put that as one of the other challenges in addition to imposter syndrome, is a work-life balance when you trying to be a good parent and also trying to be a good at your job, and trying to balance the two is another challenge that I have sometimes.
Yeah, I share some similarity with Rachel in that I am often in the classroom. When I'm not, I'm in my home studio, either working on projects for my clients or often prepping assignments and grading and that sort of thing as well. I'm fortunate that my kids have grown and have sort of moved on, so I don't want to say, I miss the days taking care of my kids, and I've always been grateful that this career has provided me the opportunity to work from home and be able to be available to my kids as they're growing. And now that they're out of the house, if I do have free time, I'm usually pursuing my hobbies, like maybe taking time to learn some music or something like that, just to get me away from sitting in front of the computer or doing my, doing something that I've been doing all day. So.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Our next question is, as an artist, I assume one needs to have enough room to let creativity grow. Do you ever get overwhelmed by work? And if so, how do you cope with it?
That's a really interesting question. And the overwhelming part of it can, in my industry, often comes with deadlines where you have something that's due at a certain time that you have to meet, and that may not always play nicely with your day-to-day schedule. So it occasionally can get overwhelming, but I guess in the extent of my career dealing with deadlines, I've just gotten used to having that pressure occasionally and trying to be proactive with work so that things aren't building up at the last minute.
Given that art is technically my side gig, self-inflicted, I do get overwhelmed at work. I don't want to say the real job, right? Because this is also important to me. And I do end up dropping my art, and then I basically guilt trip myself and think about how important it is to me. And not to make it sound like a cliche, but it is very important for my mental health. And I keep reminding myself that it's a part of who I am and I can't just let it go. And in order to do that, I need to keep pursuing it, working on it, and basically improving, right? Regularly improving in it, which takes time and effort.
Yeah, and I also experience getting overwhelmed, which is common and normal. And sometimes it's just taking a break, having one day a week where you don't work and spend the time with your family. And so I've been trying to work on that. Just get like, if you're not getting productive, just stop, and you can continue tomorrow morning when you are productive. You don't have to, you don't have to work so much that your brain is just so tired. But sometimes just waiting till the morning, you can do the same thing and be even more productive because you slept well.
Thank you for your responses. For our next question, would you consider art and science in can you describe their similarities and differences?
You need to experiment in both.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, that challenge comes up, I think, a lot, and I even see it within the art school at RIT, where there is fine art, and then there's the art that's generated for science sometimes. And I thought Yana's comment about how she might see her day-to-day images as something that's a little excuse me, a little boring maybe to her, but a lot of people do look at those images and find a great deal of beauty in those, especially if they don't fully understand what your intent was as you're creating those recordings. Science can be really beautiful, and we've had years of publications, not just photographs, but now micrographs and all kinds of tools that visualize the cell and the structures within them. So there's a tremendous amount of art to be gained from day-to-day recording of scientific information. But I do think there also is a little bit of a separation in the fine art world, where a painting or a drawing or a landscape or a figure or something like that, there's a different goal and a different a little bit of a different outcome there too. And to point to Yana's background, what she's created, even though it's based on a scientific image, is its own unique work that really has a fine art value to it, and people are able to look at that, and if they don't understand what it is, they can still have an emotional experience and reaction to it. And I think that's probably maybe the little bit of contrast that happens between a pure scientific illustration or image and then a fine art piece.
There's
This is the
also the field. Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, this is the question that I always battle with. Do people need to understand the scientific art in order to like it? Do they need to understand why it's interesting? And in a lot of cases, I feel like that would make a huge difference. But then I remind myself that people look at abstract art all the time, right? Do they know what the artist tried to portray? No, most likely not. And most likely the vast majority of the guesses are wrong. So what makes scientific art different from that?
And I was going to say there's also the field of data visualization, which is a little bit from a different angle, but understanding science and the data, and what's the best way to visualize it so that people can actually understand it. So it's from a different angle, and maybe not art per se, but in terms of there's some type of skill in terms of knowing how to visualize the data that you see.
That's huge. That's huge. I am a very visual person, and when I look at a scientific paper, the first thing I do is skim through the figures, right? If I am trying to understand how a signaling pathway works, the first thing I do is I Google it and immediately look at images rather than papers. That's how I grasp things immediately. And different people learn in different ways, but for me, that's been super helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And I would also agree. I feel like there's such an innate aspect of art within STEM itself. So your points are definitely super true. We have one more question, and then we're going to wrap up the panel. What kind of impact do you hope to make in your profession? And then there's also a second question that I'm just going to ask with this one, so feel free to respond to either or both. The second question is, people often complain that science is inaccessible to the majority of the population. Do you think that your art is helping to combat this issue?
I can respond to the first one, where the impact for me, since I work a lot on inclusive design and making things accessible, it makes me happy to go to work every day, because I feel like there's a meaning, there's a purpose, and if we could make the world a little more inclusive and software a little more accessible, and we can really make a difference and make it a little better than it was before.
I can respond to the second one. This is precisely what I think about all the time. And I think it is important to attract more people to science, whether or not they want to go into the field in their professional life. But people need to understand what's going on behind the closed walls. And it's different for academia versus the private sector. The job of academic researchers is to spread the knowledge, right? Whereas private companies want to keep trade secrets to make sure that other people don't steal them. But there's also a degree to which you should be allowed to talk about your work, attend conferences, and probably be less afraid, not as afraid of adding an element of art to that to maybe spark additional conversations.
My decision to go into higher education really came from years of working in my own studio and creating illustration and animation, but not really being able to share that. So the choice that led me to teaching was a consideration of legacy and wanting to share what I was doing in my personal studio with other people. And I felt like that was the best way to go about influencing the next generation of medical illustrators by becoming a teacher. So that was important to me to be able to do that. And I've been very fortunate, I think, particularly with a lot of patient education work that I've done, taking complex ideas and making them understandable for patients. And the most rewarding things that have happened for me have been when somebody has seen my work and come back to me and said, "Oh wow, I finally understand what's going on within my body, or what's happening to me now." And I get a lot of I guess gratification from knowing that I've been able to help people that way.
I agree
Awesome.
with,
Oh,
oh,
sorry.
sorry.
Go
I was
ahead.
going to just add that I agree with that with education, and also, I'm expanding from university to also K through 12 and teaching there about about accessible design. And so it's, teaching is a rewarding, I'm agreeing with teaching as being a rewarding job, because it's not just knowledge for ourselves, but we get to work with others and teach and spread the knowledge.
I can add 2 cents to that, but if we're out of time, I don't have to. I naively thought during high school, college, that if I'm interested in biology, medical school is the only way to go. And when I decided that it wasn't for me, a career advisor said very wise words that I've remembered ever since, that there are 3 stages where scientists discover the knowledge, teachers spread that knowledge, and doctors apply it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you guys. And thank you everyone for all of your questions. It was wonderful to hear about all of your pathways into science and art, and especially both the challenges and what inspired you to pursue a career at the intersection of both. Unfortunately, we do have to conclude the discussion and Q&A here, since we're getting close to the end of the event. So next we'll be sharing the contact information for our panelists. If you have any questions we didn't get to today, feel free to screenshot this slide. And if you have any further questions, you can reach out to any of them, and they will try their best to answer any of your questions. And lastly, we'll end with Eileen, who will talk about how you can get involved with STEM to the Sky.
Yes, great. Thanks, Annie. If we can go to the next slide, please. Yes, okay. So as you guys probably all know, we have a website where we have all of our lovely interviews posted on there, as well as the speaker panels. This will be recorded and then uploaded to our YouTube channel, and it'll be also accessible on our website. So to get involved with STEM to the Sky, we encourage you to follow us on our Instagram, Twitter, or I think it's called X now, LinkedIn, as well as YouTube channel. This is where we'll be posting all of our content. You can stay updated with our interviews and events. Our email is stemtothesky@gmail.com if you ever have any questions or want to reach out to us. You can also join our team. We have several different sub-teams in STEM to the Sky, and you can find all of them on the Join Us page on our website. So we're always looking to recruit new members who are passionate about STEM and spreading it with, the larger community and K-12 STEM education in particular. You can also subscribe to our mailing list on our website to stay updated with events and STEM to the Sky news as well. So yeah.
Thanks, Eileen. So that concludes today's speaker panel. Thank you so much for our incredible panelists, Yana, Rachel, and Craig, for taking the time to share all of your valuable experiences and advice in your respective fields. It was very insightful learning about the intersection of science and art.
We also want to thank everyone here for taking the time to attend our event today. Again, if we couldn't get to your questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to either us or the panelists. We hope that you enjoyed hearing from all three of our panelists and that you gained some new insights. Let us know your thoughts and suggestions about today's event using the feedback form that Michelle just posted in the chat. And to help us make our future events even better, you can also scan the QR code, I think, on the next slide. Yeah. And we can't wait to see you all again at our future events.
If any of you have any additional questions or suggestions for STEM to the Sky, please feel free to stay behind for a few minutes and we'd love to chat with you. If not, please don't forget to fill out the feedback form. Thank you again and have an amazing rest of the night or day for those joining from Asia. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Yana,
Thank
Craig,
you,
and
everybody.
Rachel, and
Thank
thanks
you,
everybody
everyone.
for coming.